And it's requiring us to think in a different way, to sort of walk on that razor's edge. And the people that do this, it's a very precarious place to be because you have to find balance. And the people on one side either try to pull you down to their side or push you over to the other, not realizing that you're trying to talk about a new level of consciousness that so far only a few people are noticing, except people like Jesus and Buddha. I think they all experienced this. But the key word here is experience. And the fortunate people to be around them at the time were resonating with that. But as time goes on, it gets dwindled down and it loses its fire. And it becomes a belief, and it becomes a dogma that's just passed on to generation after generation.
Belief and dogma, a blind faith. What do you say to people for whom there is evidence? For example, the power of prayer. I think there's been even some scientific books written on the power of prayer. And I know that there are people in our audience who would say that in their life, the prayer has made a difference, that there have been tangible results, that in their view, it does constitute evidence. I guess the question would be evidence of what?
Well, I think that's an extreme sign of the fact that we live in a non-local space. We live very entangled. And random event generators, I was talking to Lynn McTaggart about this. They have about 70 random event generators all over the planet. And it clearly shows that the global consciousness, the collective consciousness of this planet, is deeply entangled with world events. So when we say a prayer, I mean, it's one person saying a prayer, but imagine if we could say a prayer on a collective level. But to do that, we all need to be on the same page, and as long as we have divisive beliefs, we're never going to be on the same page. I remember something that the Dalai Lama said, because in the 10 questions to the Dalai Lama, one of the things that didn't end up in that documentary was he was asked, what could we do about the conflict in the Middle East? And he stopped and he thought for a second. He said, well, I think we could invite them to a picnic and just don't let them talk. Because the moment they start talking about their beliefs, and they're so identified with these divisive beliefs that we can't get them on the same page. This is why it's important that we all go past our beliefs. And the only way to do that is to dismantle our beliefs, one belief at a time. I remember talking to Amit Goswami. I asked him about the beliefs. He says, how do you get out of a belief system? First, you have to deconstruct the belief system. Traditionally, the teacher is supposed to remove your ignorance. But when you remove ignorance, you start with removing what is causing the ignorance, which is your belief system. So the teacher's job, indeed, is to first deconstruct your belief system and then to give you inspiration so you'll go out and create a path to discover what is spirit, what is beauty, what is love, because these things nobody can teach you. So teaching really should be a demolition job. But unfortunately, what our spiritual teachers have been giving us are beliefs, when indeed they should be breaking those beliefs down. And this is what divides us, and this is what's been causing so many of our wars. And if you look back in time, I mean, the medieval Inquisition, the Portuguese Inquisition, the Roman Inquisition, the Spanish, all of these things are based upon people's beliefs. And again, now we're going to get into this a little bit here, but it's important to understand that what we used to do, like in the Inquisitions and even in mobs, lynch mobs, we tend to hide out in mobs and do things collectively that we would never think of doing individually. Like someone was once telling me that the death penalty is a good thing and they're all for it. And I said, well, are you willing to go there and pull the lever? Well, no. Okay, then you're not really for the death penalty. You're trying to hide in a mob or a group. But the trouble is we don't have mobs anymore. We have corporations. We have nations. And we hide in these corporations and nations and religions and send them out to do things that we normally wouldn't do. I don't know one person in my life that would go to Iraq and, if there was no war there, go there and shoot Muslims. I don't know anybody. But yet, as a nation, we can enlist whole armies full of people to go over there and do this. And we support them in all of our ways by voting and by spending and the military budget and all of this. And I think we forget that 160 million other human beings have been killed by human beings in the last century alone. And this is something to really consider when we stop and look to see who is really paying for this. And it's so many women and children. I remember reading statistics in World War I, 10% of the people was innocent bystanders and collateral damage, as they call it, for lack of a better term. But World War II, it was up to about 40%. Vietnam was 60%. Well, now we're up to 90% of the people that we're killing aren't even involved in the war. So we're not even killing the people that we're supposed to be killing if we were supposed to kill anybody at all.
Well, it's hard to make that distinction when people that you're out there to kill are not wearing a uniform, somebody like the Taliban or the Al-Qaeda or something like that, I guess. But I get the point you're making, because it's been made before, is that in the name of religion, we've done abominable things, and are still doing it. Religion and religious beliefs have been used to justify not only wars, but slavery, the subjugation of women, and as you point out in your book, rape.
Right. Oftentimes women are used as reward systems for soldiers that are conquering. It's also a form of genocide, too. You can go in and wipe out the bloodline of a culture by wiping them out and impregnating the women.
You make a distinction, though, between spirituality and religion. Religion being what's represented by churches, spirituality being the kind of contact that we each as individuals can have with God, or whatever name you want to call it.
Right. In my book, I have a long list of what is spiritual and what is religious. And until we can blend those two columns together, I think we're always going to be divided on what we need to do. And, all of this is leading up to being able to see the world as it is and start handling and processing our problems and our situations differently.
Well, we'll get to that in a second. Before we leave this idea of spirituality and religion, give me some of the things that are on that list. How can you tell the difference?
Well, everything that's religious usually has a limited way of looking at it. Like God, for instance, is a being that's really limited in his scope. Like myself, I believe in some type of consciousness that permeates reality. Underneath the manifested matter of reality, there does seem to be a conscious intent. And this conscious intent has been happening since the very first moments of creation. At the first moment of creation, there was a quantum soup of atomic particles, but real quick, they formed into small components called atoms. Those atoms formed into small components called molecules. The molecules formed into cells, and the cells into organisms. There seems to be a self-organizing intent to this consciousness. And this simply means that right now, if this process is still in effect, which I would assume it is, I fail to even imagine that we are the epitome of what creation can come up with. At this point, that means that we, as human beings, are planetary cells coming together to form a planetary consciousness. Many people have talked about this. Pierre de Chardin, I know he talked about it as the new sphere. And he was a Jesuit priest, and he was one of the many, many visionaries that started to see this coming. More recently, Peter Russell, and a few years ago, Lewis Thomas wrote a book called The Lives of Cells. There seems to be a consciousness that is pulling things together, and the only thing that changes this now, because you have to think, up to this point, evolution, whatever evolution is, has happened pretty much as an automatic response, completely separate from our interaction. But what has happened now is, since we are starting to become more involved and entangled into the evolution, we're becoming conscious participants in it.
Well, I definitely want to get into that, into the practicality and applicability of consciousness and how we can change the world around us. My guest is Rahasya Poe. The book is called To Believe or Not to Believe. We'll be opening up the phone lines in just a couple of minutes, so stay with us here on Coast to Coast AM.